I wanted to welcome you, and we're going to do this poll, and we're going to do another one in just a minute. So you should all be able to see the results about what it is you're hoping to get out of this training. And it looks like most of you want skills to intervene, and you want to think through situations and what to do. That's the places. A few of you said get braver. I think that when we go through this, you'll see why I put that one as one of the options. And fewer want to get connected to others doing this work, and there are some doing other. So the skills to intervene and thinking through situations is exactly what we're going to be doing tonight, and hopefully a few of you will get braver as well. So thank you for filling that out. And then we're going to do another poll, which I'm going to pull up here. So I want to find out where you're all calling in from. So I want to share this and get you to fill this out. Oh, whoops. So if you can fill this out quickly, we can see where you're all from. Thank you. This time I'm going to let you see as we fill it out. Great, wonderful. So a lot of from the Northeast, from the Southern United States, a number 7%, 24% from the Midwest, 17% from the Northwest. Great, I know it's a lot earlier there. Thank you for joining. And there's even some people from the outside the United States. Wonderful. Thank you, and it's great to have you here. And if you're just joining, go ahead and fill out the poll saying where you're logging in from, and we're going to go on. I'm sorry to exclude those people who are on the phone from this, but I hopefully that's representative of who's on the phone as well. All right, great. We're going to get started with the slides and the presentation, and I'll give you an introduction here. So I want to tell you that we are using a number of tools, interactive tools, to make this replicate the in-person training as much as possible. But they're new to us using them. So please be patient as we try out these different tools, including the polls and the whiteboards and the Q&A panel, etc. I want to call out a number of people who have volunteered to help me think through and talk through the scenarios that we'll be sharing later. I see that Lisa Graustein is on the phone. I think Deborah Panko is on the phone. Tony Etheridge is on the line, Beth Lawn, and I see that Chrissy is here too. Just I want you to know that I see that you're here, and I'll be calling on you later in the presentation. And thank you so much for volunteering to help out in that way. So this is a bystander intervention training, and AFSC has been training a number of people in this kind of work. It's been derived from our Communities Against Islamophobia work, which looks at different aspects of Islamophobia and interrupting both policy and interpersonal violence. Obviously, this is interrupting interpersonal violence, and it's a training that I'll tell you a little bit more about in a minute, that was developed with support of our Chicago office. And I've done this a couple of times in person, and have the design of this webinar was also informed by other people who have done this training in person. And we're trying to replicate an in-person experience as much as possible on this occasion, but there's no substitute for doing it in person. And we're going to share some resources so that you can also share this training in person. So you can see me. This is also a picture of me. I'm the Director of Friends Relations. My job is to support connection with the Quaker community. I do work very, very closely with program. And so I am here presenting this in that role. And we used to have calls for spirited action. We've had them for several years, which were just phone calls that were phone calls with different program staff, focused on different issues. And this year we decided that it was time to transfer and use the amazing technology that we have into webinars, and to make these a little bit more intensive learning experiences and make the audience broader. So not just for the Quaker community, but for anyone who would find these tools useful. And so with our Sanctuary Everywhere work, we have added this component of these webinars of training. This is being recorded. You can share it widely, and I'll be giving you some resources so you can actually train others in this work. So this is the Bystander Intervention training goals. And what you see on the right is the cover page for the curriculum that I'm going to be working from. And we're not going to be using all of this curriculum. This curriculum is could be used, could take 4 hours. You can do a 3-hour training, a 4-hour training. There are a lot of scenarios. There's a lot of practice that that you can go through with this training. But I want you to know that this training, which was developed in part by Debbie Southern in our Chicago office, and who's done this training a number of times with the People's Response team of Chicago, that the curriculum is available online. So any of you can take the curriculum. They really want this spread. It's a very well written, very clearly written curriculum, and you can share it in groups that you work with, whether it's in schools, in congregations, in community groups, wherever you think people would benefit from this. That we've found that there's been a huge demand, and that's represented by the number of people on this call. And so we hope that you will spread this and share it with others. So the goals tonight, the 3 Ps, are to provide resources and tools, to just give you some tips about how to do this and some tools, to offer as much as we can in an online space, time to practice what we're talking about. And this is one piece of our commitment to love and protect one another. So the idea of Sanctuary Everywhere is to make refuge and safe space wherever we are, and to render the places that are not safe from law enforcement, particularly from state violence, but also from interpersonal and racist kind of violence that we're talking about tonight, to be many fewer. Obviously, this is a time when there's a lot of violence happening, and there's a lot of attitudes that are supporting that violence. And this is a time to really stand up for one another and to offer love and protection for one another. And one of the ideas behind the Bystander Intervention training is to take the idea of sanctuary, which is creating a safe space, a refuge, to the streets, and to wherever you go, to be a presence that helps to create safer spaces and interrupt interpersonal violence and different kinds of violence. And it's also really important that as we do this work, to stay grounded and listen to your body in the situations. I'll be reiterating that as we go through the training. And again, this training was produced by the People's Response team, and there's a link there which we will send to you. We will send you the link. If you registered for this call, we will send you the link afterwards. So we're going to move to the whiteboard, and I want you to think about these questions. What are the biggest barriers to intervening? What keeps you remaining a bystander? And how do you know when a situation requires intervention? So we're going to go over here. Okay, and you should be able to see what are the biggest barriers to intervening. And to write on the whiteboard, just go to the right and you can just put something on make a text box and just write. There we go. Worries about my own safety. Thank you. Fear. Fear and not knowing. Making the situation worse, that's a really, really common one. And not knowing if intervention is needed, that's a really important one, and we're going to be talking about that a little bit more. Fear that I won't do it right or make it worse. Worries about my own safety. If I'm out with young kids doing what white savior behaviors, intervening in that way, not knowing what to say, not thinking well on, I think, on my feet, yep. Not knowing whether the person wants me to, not knowing what to do or say, not being in situations of violence, shaming the protectee. That's really, really important one. Um, so fear of being in a situation of violence is completely understandable. You don't want to intervene and then get hurt yourself. That's understandable, especially if something is pretty clear. Where I work, the language barriers, not I would can see that people might not understand um, what's going on in the situation with that, or feel like you don't know the language in order to intervene, possibly endangering others, not recognizing it's a situation where someone should intervene. Right. These are great. These are really all of the ways that people often don't feel like they can, that they don't have the confidence and you don't know what to do. That's why we're doing this training, so that these are things that have to be embodied. And if you don't practice them and see what it feels like, it's a lot harder to do this well, or to feel like, to be brave enough to intervene in a situation when it arises. Fear of making it worse is a really common one. And we train people in bystander intervention with these goals: to reduce harm in the moment, make our presence known, and to the targeted person. And if it's a verbal and argumentative attack, the goal is to convince the perpetrator they are wrong. The goal isn't to convince the perpetrator they are wrong. It's to show observers an alternative. So if we approach bystander intervention with these two goals in mind, that you're trying to reduce harm in the moment, and then not to convince the perpetrator that they're wrong, but to show that there's a way to interrupt. So the reason that this stuff goes on and can be normalized, I mean, just like all of the instances of sexual assault that are being revealed now. So the atmosphere that makes that possible is people not saying no, is people saying, I don't know if I should say anything. And so actually not saying something when you see something that's potentially threatening is actually more problematic than doing the so-called wrong thing. And that there's a sense that that you can't, that really that making a mistake in this, but taking the risk to do it is actually better than doing nothing. And that the problem with all of this kind of violence is that it is perpetuated because people are not intervening. So these are really your hesitancies are all really legitimate, and they're very common, and they're ones that I have, and I think that the reason to have this bystander intervention training is to get the muscles and build the muscles so that when you see something, you can really intervene. I think that I want to say a little bit about intercultural allyship, because if you're a white person and you're in a situation where there's a person of color getting harassed, or a Muslim person, you generally have privilege in that situation, and so and some power because of the way that our society is structured, and so intervening by you is probably less risky than if a person of color sees that same situation. And so I just want to name really outright that that for somebody who is generally more targeted, it's trickier to do that intervention. But you can still do that. You can find a way, and we'll talk a little bit later in the presentation about ways that you can intervene if you know, in that kind of a situation. But it's really important to be aware of your social location as you do this work, and to really think consciously about, you know, what kind of risk am I taking, and can I really intervene? And so but not to let it keep you from doing something, because what we're trying to do is disrupt the atmosphere of normalizing this kind of violence. Great, thank you so much. I'm going to go back to the presentation. Okay, so I want to say that it's really when you do intervene, that one of the things, again, this goes back to the body. One of the ways to know that it's appropriate to intervene is to really listen to your body. Does this situation that you're witnessing make your stomach really tighten? Like one of the things that we often that often happens in our socialization around not intervening is that we learn not to listen to what's going on in our body. We learn not to respond. Yes, we want to stay calm. We want to breathe during these situations, but you also want to pay attention to how your body is actually responding to the situation. And it will tell you a lot of things. Neonu Span talks a lot about how we're socialized to not be able to really name and see what's right in front of us. And so really paying attention and rooting yourself in your body is really important. So tips for intervention when you see something is to be alert, to scan your environment. Again, notice how your body is responding. Remember to breathe. And if this thing looks wrong to you, to say no. We're going to practice that in a minute. And then whenever possible, to go into a situation with a buddy if possible, because that way you can test, is what I'm doing okay? You can support each other in discernment in the moment and also in being braver. And you may not be with somebody. You may not have a buddy with you or somebody that you're like on a train with or out on the streets with, but you can often catch somebody's eye and find, and it may have happened just as this situation was unfolding, where you're catching somebody's eye, and you know that they know this is wrong, and you know it's wrong, and so you can, in that moment, find somebody who can be a buddy in a situation. So I want to take a moment, actually, right now. I know you're on mute, but I think that the practice of actually saying no and not just thinking about it is important. So what I want you to do, and I'm going to do this, is for you to breathe and then really practice saying no. So I want you to square your feet with your shoulders, sit up in the chair, and take a deep breath and say no. No. Just feel how that feels in your body. No. And just take time to really feel that and have that sense. Let's do it a couple more times. No. 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 When I do that, I think of certain situations that I have felt really uncomfortable with, where I've laughed or I've turned my head, whether they're happening to me or somebody else. And it's very satisfying to think of those situations and say no. So we're going to go through the do's and the don'ts of bystander intervention. These have been compiled by our Communities Against Islamophobia work. And I want you to, and we're going to have some people read them. I think Lisa, if you can unmute yourself, and Deborah and Tony and Beth, if you're online, and Chrissy. So I want these to just be read, and then we're going to have time to talk about them and ask questions about them after we're finished. So Lisa, if you're on, will you unmute yourself, and will you read this slide, please?
Sure.
Thanks.
Do make your presence as a witness known. If possible, make eye contact with the person being harassed and ask them if they want support. Move yourself near the person being harassed. If possible, and you feel you can risk doing so, create distance or barrier between the person being harassed and the attacker. If it's safe to do so, and the person being harassed consents, film or record the incident.
Great. Thank you. So these are all, I mean, these seem to be pretty self-evident. So the principle behind this is that you really want to follow the lead of the person who's being harassed as much as possible. And there was on the barriers to intervention, there were a couple people who said that that fear that you're doing it wrong or that the person doesn't want intervention is a big deal. So really that eye contact is really important and really critical. And moving yourself near the person, so that really can just stop the situation. If there's a sense from the perpetrator that somebody is here and that and paying attention to what they're doing and giving attention, and that proximity offers support. And again, you need to make eye contact with the person, but if you can film it, that can be protective. That can be really helpful and protective. So that's another thing, that if somebody knows that you're paying attention, that there's a witness, that may be enough to stop them from doing what they're doing. Thank you. And Tony, if you're on, I'd love you to read this slide. You can just unmute yourself, and if you're on the phone, *6, and if you're on the computer, just unmute yourself. Are you there? Maybe she's not there. Chrissy, why don't you do this one? So go ahead and unmute yourself and read this. Chrissy, you there? *6 if you're on the phone, and do the microphone if you can. I saw you on here, so I'm gonna. Oh, it looks like she's off for a second. Okay. So let's. Beth Lawn, are you on? Will you go ahead? All right, so Lisa, since I know you're there, you want to read this next one too? Go ahead. Just unmute yourself and read.
You make suggestions? Would you like to walk with me over here? Move to another train car? For him to leave you alone? And then follow their lead. Notice if the person being harassed is resisting in their own way, and honor that. Especially white folks. Don't police tone of the person being harassed. Follow up with the individual being harassed after the incident is over. See if they need anything else.
Great. I think this is pretty self-evident, and I think that this is another. I mean, this core principle of following the lead of the person that's being harassed is really, really critical. And so if they are engaging in some ways, then really follow that lead. And then of course there can be these really simple interventions that like get them out of the situation. And again, honoring them and their resistance is really, really important. And some people who are being harassed will be very vocal. They're going to be vocal, and being willing to support that in the moment is really important. Great. So I'm actually going to try just looking on this and calling on one of you. Let's see. Carol, will you read this slide? And you just need to unmute yourself, and then you should be able to read it. No? Okay. All right, I'm going to read this one, I think. So this is do keep both of you safe. Assess your surroundings. Are there others nearby you can pull in to support? Working in a team is a good idea if it is all possible. We already talked about that. Can you and the person being harassed move to a safer space or place? So that's a really important principle. If safety is your goal, it's really important to really intervene in such a way that you're not provoking escalation, and that you're really figuring out what is going to be supportive to get us out of this situation. Now, if somebody is being harassed and is very, um, what's the word, very assertively responding, and they're loud themselves, um, um, again, you don't want to tone police that at all, and may want to join in and support them in some way, but your goal is safety and to intervene in the situation. Great. Okay, and there is also these, this is from another, the slides before this are from our AFSC and the People's Response teams collected do's and don'ts uh, um, sheet that we will send to you. This is from another place, and we'll give you the link for this too. So these are the four D's of bystander intervention, the four do's. So these are different tactics that you can take in the moment. So you can direct, so you can step in and directly intervene, and that's often what you think of, like when we're thinking about this, you think it's like very confrontational, very direct. That can be really effective and really important to do, but it can be pretty intimidating to do as well. So there's other techniques besides just this kind of direct intervention. You can distract them, do something to distract the harasser. And we're going to talk about this in some of the scenarios that we're going to read, like, ask them a question or do something over at the other end of the train car to distract them from what they're doing. There's lots of creative ways that you can intervene in that case. Delegate. Now, this is a really important technique. And so to work with someone with more power than you and collaborate on how to intervene. So you scan, for example, the train car, or if you're in TSA, you would scan that. And if there's a conductor on the train, try to get their support in intervening in that moment. And that can be a really powerful one. Kenyatta James, who was a co-worker here at AFSC for a long time, he described a situation in which he was going through TSA, and there was a black woman that was being harassed by a white man, a white TSA agent, and it was really making him uncomfortable. It was really overt racist harassment. And he felt like his intervention could make it worse for her, and that he could become targeted too. And so what he did is he went and found a black woman TSA agent, and he pointed out what was happening to her. And she went and she intervened instead of Kenyatta. And so that's an example of really finding somebody with some more power that can get in the way of what's going on. And then delay, again, it's really important that we build our muscles and not if we in the moment don't feel like we can do something, that's understandable. But that doesn't mean that the thing is over, that your opportunity is over. So in delay, you may see a situation that concludes without you intervening, but then you can go and check in with the person who is harassed after the incident and ask them if they are okay. And so there's a way that kind of support can be really important. There's in the moment intervening, there's seeing something right in front of you and offering support by stepping in, but it can be just as damaging for something to happen and for it to end and for nobody to acknowledge what had just happened. And so going in and checking with the person that was harassed after the incident can be a really important way of offering support. So we'll be sending this link as well as the do's and don'ts sheet that we have after the training. So now we're going to do some don'ts. And let's see. I'm going to call on somebody else, and if you don't want to be called on, that's fine. I think Joan Crawford is on the line. Would you be willing to read these? Just unmute yourself and go ahead.
Certainly.
Thanks.
Okay, don't call the police. For many communities experiencing harassment right now, including Arab and Muslim communities, Black people, queer and trans folks, and immigrants, the police can cause a greater for the person being harassed.
Great. And go ahead and read the next point.
Don't escalate the situation. The goal is to get the being harassed to safety, not to incite further violence from the attacker.
Great. Those are both really, really important. The don't call the police one is important because a lot of the people who you might see harassed, like the Arab and Muslim community, are targeted by the police, and calling the police, like there have been instances where people have called the police and somebody's undocumented, and then and in many cities police collaborate with immigration and customs enforcement, and they end up getting taken in by ICE. So it's really, really important that this principle is a really important one, because you can really cause more danger for the person that's being harassed. If the only instance that you might do that is if the person who's being harassed asks you to do it, but don't ever do it if they haven't indicated that that's what they want to do. And still, it's really, really important to be mindful of the role of the police in the community, and the way that often people who are targeted by racist and Islamophobic and xenophobic harassment are also targeted by the police, and so they're not necessarily going to be perceived as supportive, and they could be actually cause greater harm. The don't escalate the situation we've already talked about. So really thinking, breathing deeply, thinking very mindfully, again, I think it's worse not to do anything, but it's also important to be as conscious and as clear and as strategic in what you do decide to do as well. So, okay, so this last one, Joan, why don't you go ahead and read this too? Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Silence is dangerous. It communicates approval and leaves the victim high and dry. If you find yourself too nervous or afraid to speak out, move closer to the person being harassed to communicate your support with your body.
Great, thank you. So a principle behind this whole training is to break the silence, is to break the silence about what is happening, and to intervene and really do something that creates a different kind of atmosphere, a different kind of community, where we stand up for one another and we support each other, and we show up for each other, and we stop incidents like this from happening. So before we get into scenarios, I want to open up the Q&A panel. And look, there's a lot of questions here already, I'm gonna answer a few of these that are here, but if you have any questions about what you just heard, particularly the do's and don'ts, but anything that you want to answer, that would be great. So Jonathan Betzal asks, will we receive a transcript afterwards? You're not going to, we're recording this, so you can watch this again. But the training itself, as I said in the beginning, we will send you a link to the whole training, which is basically a transcript of what I'm saying. Actually, there's a lot more information than that. So basically, yes, you're going to receive the curriculum that this training is based on. And so,
Lucy, let me help
okay,
you
let's
real
see.
quick just for a second here.
Yeah, go ahead.
One, just to remind the audience that are on their computers, at the bottom of your screen, just below, there's a presentation tab and a Q&A tab. You've probably been following the presentation tab, and now you want to switch over and click on that Q&A tab. And for anyone who is asked to participate in and speak to the group, again, a reminder, at the bottom of your screen, there's a little microphone in a round circle, and you click on that and it will mute your line, but if it's muted, you can click on it and unmute it before you read or participate. Thanks. Lucy, back to you.
Great. So there's another question from Zed Huff, who asks, if you are from an out group of the person being harassed, couldn't silently approaching them likely perceived as an added threat? It's a really, really good question. So what I would say is that there is, especially when somebody's being attacked, they may feel more vulnerable, they may feel more sensitive. But I also think that that body language in this instance is really important. So how you do that approaching is really, really critical. Approaching in such a way that's as non-threatening as possible, keeping your hands and your body open, and indicating and really making eye contact with them as much as you can to sort of indicate that your support, I think, are really important. Yes, of course, if you're somebody who's traditionally cast as a perpetrator, it may be that people will be wary, but I think that how you do that and how you approach the situation will make a difference. Certainly what you do matters as well, but I think that how you approach makes a huge difference. So are there other questions? The Q&A panel is showing. Are there any other questions? Oh, here's another one. What if there are many attackers? Do the tactics change? That's a really, really good question, and it's covered in the curriculum. We're not going to do a scenario. I don't think we're doing a scenario with more than one aggressor in this situation, but I think that that's a really, really important question, and I think that in that kind of a situation, I think that it's really important that you try to find allies. Like try to, if you're in a situation where there's more than one attacker, trying to make contact with other people that may be supportive is going to be even more important. But I think still, even if there's more one attackers and it feels more violent, like very risky for you, there are places, and you can stand further back, intervene by yelling. There are other ways that you can do that. But I think that particularly in that case, finding somebody else who could be an ally with you is a really important thing. If the situation starts getting violent, how can we help to de-escalate? That's an excellent question. This is Melissa. I think that there's some of those D's that we mentioned earlier, like distracting them, and I think this is the situation that comes up most in terms of when people wanting to call the police. Like this seems like way bigger than I could ever do, and I think that that's the situation. But I think that you can. There are still ways that you can intervene. Again, like finding a way that's further back in order to intervene. You can again find somebody else to support. You can I think the saying no, it can be a really, really powerful thing. I think also in this instance, the recording of it can be a really powerful intervention. I mean, I think that for me, one of the things that happens is that I envision the needed intervention to be pretty major, and subtle and small things can make a really big difference, like pulling out your cell phone and recording what's happening, like shouting no from a certain distance. Just letting somebody know that this is witnessed and somebody is saying that this is wrong can make a really big difference. And I think that the de-escalation, I mean, I think when something is violent, you really want to indicate your sense that this is wrong. I don't know that that's necessarily going to escalate things. That could be diffusing. So like we would think of, we often think of de-escalating as in this sort of hyper calm way to do it. But I think that, and yes, internally I think you need to be calm, but it could be a more noisy intervention that's not necessarily going to not necessarily going to escalate. Again, what I would say is, like, I mean, I've done this training a couple of times. I've been in some situations that are similar to this, but I don't think of myself as an expert. And I think talking things through and really practicing, like with the curriculum, this kind of situation is really, really important. So those are I think those are really, really important questions. And we're going to be practicing and talking about some scenarios that verge on this. They're not necessarily explicitly violent or with two attackers, but there are scenarios in the curriculum that are like that. And I would really highly recommend that you walk through that with other people, really think through it. So, any other questions? Am I missing any? Lem, are there any on the questions at AFSC one?
No, most of those have been people asking about connection issues, not many.
Great. Ted McKnight says, in the moment, how do you know whether the person wants you to intervene? So again, this is about, that's really important. One example that we have is that you know, there may be a couple that's having a very energetic conversation that seems verging on violence, or you know, or even, you know, our cultural response might be, oh, that's way noisy. That's not what I'm used to. And I think that this is where it's really important to be listening to your body, to be responding to, like, what's your gut saying to you in that moment. That's an example of that. And again, if you, I mean, deep down, I know of moments when something pretty pretty violent or pretty that made me really uncomfortable happened, and afterwards I'm like, oh, that was pretty horrible. And I knew it in the moment, but I second guessed myself, and so I didn't take any action. But the other way that you can tell if somebody wants you to intervene or not is really to catch their eye, and they may not say, yes, I want you to do something, but if you catch their eye and they look afraid, or if you catch their eye and they are like getting smaller in the situation, you know, there's lots of body language things that can give you an indication that something is not right and this person needs somebody to step in and support them. Here's another question. In lieu of calling the police when it gets violent and others aren't around, a person can yell, stop. I called 911, even if you haven't. This worked in Philadelphia late at night for my daughter who witnessed harassment turning violent. Thank you, Patricia. That's really great. So again, it may be violent, and a loud intervention isn't necessarily escalation, and some sense that that there will be somebody coming. It makes a huge difference. So that's a really great example. Any other questions? Okay, great. All right, let's move on, and we're going to practice some of these scenarios. Thank you for those really wonderful questions. Again, I would really recommend, this conversation is really great. Obviously, there's some limitations on this online format. So I would really recommend taking the training or taking some of these scenarios and you know, and trying them out. If it's just a small group, your own family that you want to try it out with and sort of build these muscles, that would be fine. There's lots of contexts in which you can do this. So, okay, so here's the do's and don'ts, and then we're going to do some scenarios. So Lisa and Joan, I hope that you'd still be willing to do some of this. And I don't know if Chrissy, if you are able to unmute yourself. If you are, just say a word. And Syra, I see that you're on. If you're willing to do this, that would be really terrific. And Deborah, if you are there and can unmute yourself, that would be great. So just, and Lisa, if you want to unmute yourself again, that would be really terrific. So we have these volunteers who have agreed to sort of help. Oh, Syra can't unmute herself. Oh, interesting. Sorry. And Joan, if you'd be willing to step in, that would be terrific. And let's see. Jaina, I don't know if you'd be willing to help us with this. That would be really great if you'd be willing. Unmute yourself if you are. So we're going to try this out together. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a scenario. This is the first scenario. And what I'd like is I'm going to read it to you, and then in all of these instances, I'm going to portray the aggressor. And then in this case, we need 2 other people. So Lisa, are you there?
Yep.
Great. And Joan, would you be willing to do this with me?
Sure.
With us? Great.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is the situation. So there's verbal harassment on the train where the person being targeted is really uncomfortable. So we're riding at the train, it's crowded, and you notice a man muttering slurs and threats under his breath towards a young person of color near him. You are nearby and notice there is more room on the other end of the train car. What do you do? So, so I'm going to portray the man who's muttering slurs and threats, and Lisa, would you be willing to be the person of color that's being harassed?
Sure.
And Joan, would you be willing to be the person who attempts to intervene?
Sure.
Great. Okay, great. So this this is hard for me to do this, but I'm going to do it anyway. So I see you sitting there, and I don't know why you're on this train. I don't understand why you're there. You're taking up way too much space. You need to get. I don't think you should be on this train. If you don't move over,
Young man,
I am going to do
hear what's
something
going
to
on
you.
here. Young man, I hear what's going on. Would you like to move with me to the other side of the train?
Okay.
I don't know. I don't think this is a good. What are you doing? What are you doing here? I wasn't doing anything. He doesn't belong here. Why are you being nice to him?
I'm going to stand up first, and then you follow along with me.
Okay. Okay.
Where are you going?
Keep walking. Is this okay? Do you want to sit here?
Okay. This is better.
I don't know what the matter with you is. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. So, so what I want to do now is we're gonna switch to the whiteboard again, and in this case, what I'd like you to do is respond to what it was that Joan did to intervene, and so this is for this first scenario. So what you think Joan did well, and what you think should be done. Right, directly address the person being harassed and ignore the harasser. That's a really effective de-escalation tool. There was a real amount of calmness. She didn't directly confront the harasser, which risks escalating the situation. Moved away from the aggressor, took some opportunity to move away from the aggressor. Provided an option to the person being harassed to get away. gave the targeted person instructions when they seemed like they were receptive. Yeah, move the targeted person to a safer place. And somebody said that it might be good to ask the victim what they wanted to do, and made an invitation, and was really reassuring, and told them to keep walking. Checked in with me. So that's what I think what Lisa said. Yeah, those were good. So really, this de-escalation is really important. So Lisa and Joan, how did that feel for you?
I appreciated Joan's directiveness, particularly when I think about being a young person. It felt like she was both checking in with me, but also like being in charge. And I can imagine when the man started harassing me, once we started moving, it was really helpful to just have a keep walking. Like I had direction on what I needed to do that wasn't an overbearing direction, but what felt supportive.
Great, great.
I can say that having the list of do's and don'ts presented right before I did this exercise made all the difference in the world for me. It
Great.
really helped.
Wonderful. Terrific. Great. Yeah, I thought you did a great job, and I think that the distracting and the really overt support, but not feeding the aggressor, was really, really well done. And it's highly effective to act as though you know the person. You didn't do that, but that also can be a way. You were very friendly. You didn't necessarily assume that you knew each other, but you did that. Saying something like, "Hey, I haven't seen you in so long. You want to go catch up over there?" That can be a way to do it. That can be. Some people say, well, that could be disarming for the person that's being supported, but I think it also can be helpful. I mean, I really like what you did, Joan. And you want to open, again, I thought what was really nice is you opened opportunities for the person that was being harassed to accept your support, and he could have rejected or she could have rejected your support. And it may feel silly or vulnerable. This can be really effective. And the worst that happens is you apologize for mistaking them for someone else. So that's one way, as well as what you did. I thought you did a really great job. All right, great. So we're going to go to the next scenario. And I am going to keep you as a team and see if we can get another person to join us. Let's see. Okay, let's go back to the slideshow. So here is the next scenario. And if the two of you would be willing to continue in this, that would be really great. And then let's add another person. If one of the people that I called on can unmute themselves, that would be really great. Sarah, I don't know if you'd be willing to join us. If you would, just unmute yourself.
Sarah, I just unmuted your line. Is this Sarah in Namaste? Or?
No, it's not Sarah.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
Sarah, you might be unmuted, so if you are, that would be great to have you join us.
Sarah, I just unmuted you, if you want to try.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, great, thank you.
Oh, great.
All right, so here is another scenario. This is, I will be the man who is white shouting aggressively, Lisa, why don't you be the older black woman if you're willing? Well, no, actually, Sarah, why don't you be the older black woman?
Okay.
And then there'll be another person. So and then Lisa, you can be the intervener. Does that work?
Yep.
Okay, great. Mm-hmm. So I'll read it over. You and your friend are walking in a crowded shopping area and you overhear yelling. You stop and notice that a man you perceive to be white is shouting aggressively at an older black woman, including telling her to get a job. She is yelling back and pointing her cane at him, telling him to leave her alone. What do you do? All right, great. So what are you doing here? You're just wasting people's time. You need to go get a job. Why are you lurking here? What is the matter with you? You need to go and get a job. What's the matter with you?
Know me?
I do. I know your type. I know you're kind. And I think
I've never
you should go
seen you
get a
before.
job.
Hey, good afternoon. I'm so sorry to interrupt you. Ma'am, my
You need
name's
to get
Lisa.
a
Would you
job.
mind if I just sat down and chatted with you for a minute?
Absolutely.
Great. You know, I was wondering, do you have you seen any good movies in this
What are you
area, or do you know
doing?
this
She
good
needs to
coffee
get a
shop around? I don't know
job.
the neighborhood real well.
Can't you see I'm talking to my friend, sir? Let's go talk over here, ma'am.
You need to get a job.
Hope you have a good day. Should we go over to this coffee shop?
That would be great. Thank you.
All right.
Great, thank you very much. So I'm going to ask first, how did that feel?
A little awkward,
yes.
but good.
How did that feel, Lisa?
It's a little bizarre to do this without any visual, but it felt fine.
Yes. Yeah.
It felt
And
good
what
that
did you think
she left me enough space to still have my own voice.
Okay, great. That's really, really important. I think that's a really important piece. So go ahead and say what you thought that they did well and other tips that you would have for this kind of scenario. Oh, somebody said that the person harassing would rather keep yelling. That's true. This is hard online because it's harder, it's easier physically because I want you to be able to hear the interventions. So it's harder to just keep being the loud voice that's attacking. So that's one of the, but I hear you. I really like that you went over and started a conversation, establishing the connection with the targeted person, interrupting the attacker's agenda and redirecting. The world did not revolve around the attacker. That's really, really important. It can be very, very powerful not to reinforce the behavior of the person that's attacking. The warm, upbeat tone of the woman helping, and could we move physically closer to the stand near the woman? So that I think is really important. All of those things are really, really important. And this one, I think the things that you did were good. And again, not doing anything is always worse than stepping in when something wrong is happening. I really appreciate your willingness to sort of do that. And like the redirection, I think is a really powerful intervention. This is an actual scenario that happened, I think, in a mall in Chicago. And the people that were intervening in that, they were really direct. And in this case, the woman who was being yelled at, she was yelling right back at him, like really directly yelling back, "No, get away! This is not. This is not. This does not." She was just very, very assertively yelling back. And this scenario is based on a real situation that happened the day after the election. After a year ago, and observing the white man yelling racially loaded phrases heard, two People's Response Team members joined the black woman in yelling at the man to leave her alone and walk away. As they were standing, other passerbys joined in on the chorus, and he eventually left. And they checked in with her and walked with her to her next destination, and they didn't de-escalate the situation. So they didn't necessarily use soft tones in that situation. They simply expressed the support for the person who is being harassed and affirmed her agency in shutting down the attack. So I think it's a really great story. So they joined with her in her interruption. She was already trying to interrupt on herself, and I think that was a really, really powerful way to do it. And not to say that what you all did was there's nothing wrong with it, but this is the suggestion and like really reinforcing the agency of the person that's trying to fight back. Here's a couple more things that you had said. Perhaps standing behind and saying, "I've got your back," would be more effectively honor the person's own power. That's great. And in this case, they just aligned with what she was doing and supported what she was doing. That's really great. Let's see, there was some others. That's great. Thank you so much. So we're going to do one more of these. Sorry, it takes a little while. All right, so here is the third scenario. So this one is around a situation with police harassing a stranger. And this is one that obviously there's a whole different power dynamic in this kind of one, but we thought it was important to include this. There are actually 5 scenarios in this training, and we've chosen 3 of them that are representative, but the one that you all asked a question about, if there's more than one attacker, that is also one of the scenarios. So if you take this curriculum and practice it at home, you'll be able to see that. So let's see, for this one, let's see, there's 2 police officers in this case. There is the targeted person, there's the bystander who intervenes. So I will act like the 2 police officers, just because I don't think that you're necessarily going to be able to hear both of them. And Joan, if you'd be willing to be the targeted person in this situation, that would be great. And then we need a bystander who intervenes in this case. Let's see. Lisa, would you be willing to do that again? Would
Sure.
be great. Okay, great. And then we need a store manager too. So let's see if Sarah, would you be willing to do that part?
Yep.
Great. Okay, so I'll read it and then we'll act it out. You and a friend are walking home past a 7-Eleven and notice 2 police officers harassing someone who appears to be homeless and telling them they cannot sit on the sidewalk. You also observe that the manager employee of the store is watching the situation. What do you do?
Man, I told you I just need to sit here for a little while. I'm not feeling good.
I need you. No, it's not okay for you to be here. This isn't
Come on,
okay.
officer.
I may need to arrest you.
Store manager, do you know this person on the sidewalk? Is this someone who's familiar to you?
I need to a minute and catch my breath. Please, officer.
You know the person who the police are talking to? Is this person familiar to you?
No, I don't know them.
If you keep talking to me this way,
No,
I'm going to
I
need to arrest you.
Okay.
Sit down, please, officer. I'm not disrespecting you. Just let me get a breath.
I'm going to need to arrest you.
Excuse me. Hi. I'm just walking by. I'm wondering if maybe is there anything I can do to help the situation? I see that you're trying to get somebody to move. I'm a teacher. Can I maybe talk to her for a moment? Would you let me do that?
I don't know. I mean, she's around here all the time, and I don't know that. I don't know that
It's
you
true.
can.
She's around here all the
anything.
time, disturbing my
Well,
business.
Okay, I'm ready. Thank you. Thank
Okay.
you,
Hi,
ma'am.
my name's Lisa. Should we just walk over to that park? Is that okay if I walk with you?
That would be fine. Thank you. I just needed to catch my breath. Thank you.
Why don't you take my arm?
Oh, they're always giving me such a hard time.
Yeah.
Oh, Lord.
Yeah, let's just go get a little space.
Great, thank you. And again, we're limited by this format because I would probably keep talking, but I really wanted people to hear your interventions. So, so how did that feel, Sarah and Lisa and Joan?
This is Lisa. I was the intervener. I was really at a loss of who the person to approach first was. And generally, I think I would want to approach the person being attacked, but I feel like when police are that riled up, I've got to acknowledge them first. Otherwise, it doesn't work. And I've been in a position several times of putting myself between the police and my students. And if I don't engage with the police first, I don't get any leverage with them. And I don't like that. So I'm really open to feedback about how that could have been done differently.
This is Joan. As a woman of color, it's pretty easy for me to feel powerless in a situation when there are police standing over me. So it was much easier for me to assume that role, unfortunately, than it was to assume the role of the bystander trying to intervene.
Interesting. Thank you. Thank you for doing it and for portraying it, making it very vivid. Yeah, thank you. I think that's also important, like who you identify with in terms of acting these out is really, really important. Thank you. So I have the whiteboard up, and if you all want to write some thoughts about what they did and what advice you might have. Have your phone out so you can record it. So here's bystander, excellent choice of approach in getting the police. I mean, I think that, Lisa, what you did, like being direct with the police so that it doesn't get worse is a really valid option. And it's a tricky situation. It feels like a lot riskier, I think. You know, the police are generally armed. So trying to engage other observers to intervene in a group. That's a really interesting strategy as well. Somebody said they wanted the store owner to help more. And this is interesting because it's likely the store owner called the police. So I think that's a really interesting. They said they like the teacher dynamic. I think, you know, teachers are generally considered to be benevolent forces in the community. So actually naming that, I think, is a really good thing. Somebody said, what if the police officers happen to me demands that you step away or face the consequences? So I don't think that I was actually acting fully the part of the police officer and how actually dangerous and threatening that situation could be. So there's likely to be a lot more resistance on the part of the police to your intervention, and to be prepared for that. Although social location in this situation is really important, and so Lisa naming herself as a teacher was really important. Like, oh, okay, I'm here, and I'm going to use my position, my social position, to try and get this to stop. Since when is it illegal to sit on a sidewalk? Okay, that's exactly the point, and that's why it's important to intervene. Things are criminalized all the time based on people's class status and race status, and so you know, and what's happening in cities all the time now is that more and more, like, homelessness itself is being criminalized, and the spaces in which homeless people can be are much fewer. So so thank you for those. By this time, the officer's level of rationality is diminished by perceived resistance. That's really important. So the intervening so that their what they're actually doing is revealed to those people who are watching and also to themselves possibly. Somebody says, and many communities have anti-vagrancy laws that specifically cite loitering, which is awful, but it's another way in which state violence is perpetrated. So this is really important. So thank you. That's really great. I have a friend who actually is part of the Coalition for Real Justice in this town. She's a Black woman who is working in a coalition against police brutality. And she tells the story about, she was in a convenience store, and there was a man that was being held by the security officer. It wasn't a police officer, for supposedly stealing something. And what she did was she did a mini Know Your Rights training. She went up to him and she said, you don't have to stay here. They don't have the authority hold you this way. You can leave. So she went up and she actually gave him a note, the guy who was being held, a know your rights training, and he actually said, oh, I can leave, and he resisted and he did leave. And I mean, I thought that was a pretty great way to do it. And this kind of intervention, the other things that we've been looking at are interpersonal. So obviously there's always power dynamics, but in this case there's real state power that's involved. So it feels riskier, and it's also really critical to intervene. So this scenario we included because there's so many situations of interpersonal harassment that we witness or are asked about that are in fact instigated by or involving the police. And so it's really important to respond to that. And then in this particular scenario, we would hope the bystanders would engage the store manager to encourage them to assure the police that the person was welcome, which is, I think, part of what you were trying to do, or not causing problems. So you're actually trying to get the store manager, who may have actually called the police, to change their perspective on this person. People with institutional power in a situation involving police can have far more influence than bystanders or passers-by without an apparent relationship or connection to the situation. We would also hope that one of the bystanders would ask the person who appears to be homeless whether they are okay, if they need anything, which I think Lisa did do that, or if they would like us to wait with them until the police leave. And Lisa actually walked away with this homeless person. One of the biggest myths about cop watching is that it means antagonizing, engaging with the cops themselves. While any engagement during a situation involving police will likely be bothersome to officers, we have seen it to be very effective to try to communicate directly with the person they are questioning or arresting instead of the officer. So that example that I told about Megan is her doing exactly that. She was giving a know your rights training right there. This simultaneously shows the officers that they are being watched and serves multiple purposes. So another option is, if you have it, is to make a phone call to a free legal aid hotline. So in Chicago there's one, in most cities there are one. So if your intervention isn't effective, that's another way that you can also help. So great. Thank you so much for being willing to step in there and act this out. It makes so much difference to be able to hear this. And I really appreciate all of your feedback. So we're going to move over to the Q&A panel. So if there's more questions, so here we go. Is there a way to back up with the slides even while listening as it goes forward? There isn't. I don't think there is, but of course this thing is all recorded. If you like, I can send you the slides deck for you to use as you like. I'm happy to include that in the links that we send out. Okay, let's see. What if there is a language barrier? Is it could directly ask the harasser to please leave the woman alone? I think that would be fine. If there's a language barrier, there's ways to communicate with a person being harassed if you don't share a language, like non-verbally. That's what I would recommend. And yes, it would be directly. I think that would be okay. Nicolette's asked, in these scenarios, the person being harassed is welcoming of the intervention. What if the victim is set on responding to engaging with the harasser and escalating the situation? So that one was answered in the second scenario, where the person was directly, not necessarily escalating it, but directly confronting it. And again, like supporting them in their intervention is actually a really effective way to be supportive. Brunella asked, in both scenarios, what should you do if the attacker follows you? Wow, that is a really, really good question. I mean, I think in the case of the mall thing, in the recounted story, there were more than one support person, so I would try to get more people to support it. And I think that if people feel like if the attacker is only one person and there are more people in support, I think that can be a really effective way to intervene. And then Kelsey has a question for Joan. What could a bystander do to help empower you in a situation where the police are interacting in this way? That's a great question, Joan. If you want to respond to that, like what, in terms of your feeling about what you would want to happen in a situation like that, having played that role, what would you say?
Can I answer vocally, or do I have to write out the answer?
No, you can just answer with your voice.
I would felt empowered or comforted if the person sat down with me, because I envisioned these two police officers standing over me, the manager of the store standing over me or glaring from a distance, bystanders on their feet. I'm the only person that's down on the ground. So, you know, I don't know what the particulars would be in this particular situation, but I would want someone to sit with me, then help me get up once I start to move.
Great, great, thank you. And this is a really important thing about acting these out, because as you act them out, you will feel in your body like this is what I would like to happen, and have these conversations with each other. So, and obviously those you know, Lisa and Sarah and Joan, who actually did act these out, they have some of that bodily information. So it's really helpful to try and do this yourselves. And Lem says you have to try to get this right and be willing to take your bet and try action. And I think that's totally the point of all this training, is just to take a risk. But thank you, Joan. Thank you for offering your perspective. And thank you for all of you. And thank you to all of you who stepped in to act out with me. Thank you. I appreciate it. So we are close to being done. I'm going to go back to the presentation and show you some resources. And these are resources that we are going to send to you. So you don't necessarily need to write down these long links that are here.
Remember, you need to switch over locally for the audience to the presentation tab at the bottom of your screen.
Okay, we did the questions and answers, and then here's the resources. So the People's Response Team curriculum is at peoplesresponseteamchicago.org. They have a curriculum for the bystander intervention training. They also have a curriculum for cop watch training. The do's and don'ts of bystander intervention, all these I'm going to send you, and then the 4 Ds of bystander intervention, which is part of Thought Catalog. So we'll send all of these to you. And to conclude, we have 2 short polls that we'd like you to fill out. And one of them is, we really do want to encourage you to use these materials and use these with your community. So the first one is, you know, do you think you'll use the curriculum to train others to do bystander intervention? And we'll let you watch this. Great. Wonderful. Great.
Lucy, I just want to hop in. I voted, and I would just say that the word train is a little more than I would ever do, but I'll talk it up.
Okay, great. Yeah, and you might find somebody, if there's people in there that would be able to look at this content and this training, and you think would be you know, are good facilitators that you'd like to draw in and do this with, that would be a great option too. But you also could just do it in your family or do it in a small group of people. And then the last poll is, how do you feel now? So this is kind of to assess, you know, whether we met the goals and your aspirations for this. And I'll show you this. Great, thank you. Thank you very much. Lots of people that are braver and more confident. Yeah, overwhelmed. I completely understand, overwhelmed. I would recommend taking a look at the curriculum and thinking about this a little bit more. This is a hard thing to do. It's so opposed to our socialization. It's a really hard thing to do. But I hope you will keep trying it out and thinking about this and talking about it. And one of the things that one real way to start this, if you're not ready to sort of think that you're going to actually intervene, is start scanning your environment. Like when you're out on the streets, when you're on the train, just pay attention to the dynamics that you see, and just beginning to train yourself to be not on your phone, but actually really present with what's going on is a really good way to sort of develop your muscle in noticing dynamics, and can lead to you being willing to get braver in terms of actually intervening. So, so that is all we have for this evening. Thank you so much. Looks like most of you stayed for the whole presentation. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you very much for being a part of this. I hope you will share the resources that we send you, and let other people know. This was recorded, so this can be shared just as a training, and we'll be sending you that link. I really, really appreciate you being a part of this. Lem, I think, is going to unmute all the lines so you can say good night as we say goodbye.
Everyone be warned, we're going unmuted and we can shout out our good nights.
Thank you so much, Lucy, for joining us.
Thank you, Lucy.
Good night. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Lucy.
I
appreciate this.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Good night.
Ciao.
Good night.
Bye-bye.